Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to talk about something that's been making waves across the NHL 26 community, the brand new update 1.1.3 that just dropped. Now, if you've been playing NHL 26 since launch, you already know it's been a pretty rough ride in certain modes, especially when it comes to stability and online play. And this patch, while not the flashiest or filled with new content, is actually a pretty big deal because it finally addresses some issues that were driving players absolutely crazy. So let's unpack this whole thing together, talk about what actually changed, what's fixed, what's still broken, and what this means for the future of the game. First off, this update landed officially on October 6th, 2025, around midday, depending on your region, and it came after a short server downtime that EA Sports announced earlier that morning. They took the servers offline for a little bit to roll out the patch across all platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. It wasn't a huge update in size, maybe a few hundred megabytes depending on your system, but it's what's inside that counts. And what's inside this one is stability. Straight up, that's the keyword here. Stability. The main headline of Update 1.1.3 is that it fixes a major crashing issue in EASHL 6v6 dressing rooms. If you've been part of that scene, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. For weeks after launch, players were reporting that every time they tried to load into a 6v6 dressing room or even start a match, the game would freeze, crash, or just boot them back to the main menu. Some people lost progress, others couldn't even play with their friends because the whole lobby would break apart. It was incredibly frustrating, especially for the hardcore players who spend most of their time in EASHL coordinating with teammates, customizing clubs, and grinding through divisions. This bug basically made the mode unplayable for a chunk of the community, and it's been the #1 complaint across the forums and Reddit since the game launched. So, EA finally addressed it in this patch. According to their notes, they isolated the cause of the crash and implemented a fix that stabilizes how the dressing room handles player data and connections. That's the technical part, but in practice, it means you should now be able to enter and load up 6v6 sessions without your system imploding. From what I've seen across community threads, the early feedback after the update went live has been mostly positive. Players are reporting smoother transitions, fewer random disconnects, and a lot less crashing overall. Of course, you're still going to run into the occasional lag spike or desync, it's online hockey after all, but compared to before, it's night and day. Now, what's interesting about this patch is that it's very focused. EA didn't try to do too much at once, which honestly is probably the right call. When a game is having major stability problems, you don't want to bundle in a ton of gameplay changes or new features at the same time, because that just introduces more potential bugs. What they did instead was zero in on the most game-breaking issue and fix it before tackling anything else. And that's a good sign that the development team is actually listening to player feedback and prioritizing properly. It's one of those moments where you can see a bit of maturity in how they're handling the live service model of NHL now. That being said, this update isn't just about that one bug fix. It also includes a handful of general stability and performance improvements across the board. EA mentioned gameplay performance enhancements, which is kind of a vague phrase, but based on community testing, it seems like they smoothed out some of the stuttering that happened during online matches, particularly in World of Chell and HUT games. Some players noted that animations feel a bit cleaner, skating feels slightly more responsive, and camera transitions between plays don't hitch as often as before. It's not like the game feels dramatically different, but it's that subtle level of polish you start noticing when you've been playing long enough. One of the big underlying problems with NHL 26 early on was how inconsistent it felt from match to match. One game would be silky smooth, and the next one would feel like you were skating through molasses with a controller input delay. If this patch does anything to stabilize that experience, even just a little, it's a huge win. EA hasn't gone into technical detail about how they achieved it, but players are speculating that the team may have optimized some back-end netcode or server routing issues that were causing packet loss during matchmaking. I think it's also important to talk about the timing of this patch. We're only a few weeks into the game's full release, and we've already seen multiple updates in quick succession. 1.1.10, 1.1.2, and now 1.1.3. That's a much faster cadence than older NHL titles used to get. In the past, we'd sometimes wait a month or more for even small hotfixes, but this time EA's been pushing patches almost weekly to address urgent issues. That kind of quick turnaround suggests they're running a tighter feedback loop between QA and the player base, which is encouraging. Of course, part of that is just necessity. The more live service the NHL series becomes, the more critical it is to keep players from dropping off early. But still, it's refreshing to see active support. The other thing I want to point out is that this patch doesn't touch any of the core gameplay balance yet. So if you were hoping for tweaks to goalie AI, stick physics, or poke check effectiveness, those haven't been touched. It seems like the developers are holding off on big tuning updates until the stability phase is complete. And that's fair. There's no point in adjusting gameplay when people can't even stay connected long enough to experience it properly. So expect those deeper gameplay patches to come a bit later, possibly around update 1.20 or maybe in one of the post-launch content drops. That being said, players have been very vocal about what they want fixed next. If you go through Reddit or the EA forums, you'll see a consistent list of complaints. Goaltenders being too reactive on cross-crease passes, puck pickups still being inconsistent, certain body checks feeling magnetized, and of course, the ongoing debate about skill-based matchmaking in EASHL. It's a heated topic. Many players feel like matchmaking isn't fair because it sometimes pairs smaller clubs against powerhouse teams with completely different skill levels. EA hasn't commented on any changes to matchmaking in this patch, so it's safe to assume that's still being tuned behind the scenes. Now let's talk about the community reaction to update 1.1.3 in more depth, because that's where things get really interesting. As soon as the patch dropped, the EA NHL Twitter account and Reddit lit up with reactions. A lot of players were thankful that the 6v6 crash was finally resolved, but there's also this underlying skepticism. And honestly, that's understandable. NHL fans have been burned before. We've seen patches that fix one problem but quietly introduce another, or promises that certain issues were resolved when they actually weren't. So, while the feedback is mostly positive, there's still a cautious tone in the community. People are happy, but they're keeping their eyes open for what breaks next. What's cool, though, is that the devs seem to be engaging a little more this time. There have been responses from community managers acknowledging known issues and thanking players for their reports. That kind of transparency, even if it's just small posts on social media, helps rebuild some of the trust that the series has lost over the years. If they keep communicating like this, acknowledging problems quickly and patching them even quicker, it could mark a real shift in how EA supports NHL games post-launch. So, beyond the tech side, let's think about what this patch represents in a bigger sense. NHL 26 was marketed as a foundation year, where EA was rebuilding a lot of systems under the hood. And they introduced some new animations, tweaked player control, improved skating physics slightly, and tried to make the presentation more immersive with new commentary and broadcast packages. All of that was cool in concept, but when you've got stability issues like crashing lobbies, all those features kind of fade into the background. Nobody cares about updated camera angles when you can't even finish a match. So by addressing this stability issue first, EA is finally creating a foundation for the rest of those improvements to actually matter. Another interesting aspect is how patches like 1.1.3 impact the competitive scene. Even though the NHL esports scene isn't as massive as something like FIFA or Madden, there's still a dedicated community of EASHL and competitive players who take this stuff seriously. Those guys can't practice or scrim properly if the game is constantly crashing. So a fix like this doesn't just improve the average player's experience, it actually helps stabilize the grassroots competitive ecosystem around the game too. And, one thing that really stands out is how much this patch says about EA's priorities. If you look at the wording of the update notes, it's clear they wanted to get this fix out as fast as possible, even if it meant delaying other improvements. And that's smart, because in live service games, perception is everything. If players feel like the developers are ignoring a major issue, frustration builds fast. But if they see consistent updates, even small ones, it keeps the community engaged. And that engagement is crucial for modes like World of Chell, where player population directly affects matchmaking times and the overall experience. Now, speaking of World of Chell, it's worth noting that while this update doesn't specifically list Chell-focused fixes, some players have reported smoother hub navigation and faster dressing room load-ins even outside of EASHL. It could be an indirect improvement caused by the backend changes. There's also a bit of chatter about the menus feeling snappier, though that might just be placebo effect. Hard to say without side-by-side testing.